of the energy we actually generate is literally wasted because we deal in heat!
But renewable energy is still produced by heat. Today we're going to be looking at another heavily requested Corridor Crew video. Specifically, how many solar panels are needed to cover the world, and it looks like it compares it to nuclear and coal and oil as well. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. I've also minored in green energy, so this should be interesting.
The year is 2100 and humanity is living in a solar punk future of free energy and
2100 solar punk. That's hilarious. If everything runs on solar, we must have finally figured out that whole energy storage thing, right? Wonder which is more plausible by 2100. Solar punk or everything being nuclear fusion? The sun is also powered by nuclear fusion, but you know what I mean.
clear air. We've managed to stop the rising global temperatures and stabilize our atmosphere. So yeah, life is pretty dang good now. Or is this just fantasy? 2100 and the air is so hot and toxic we can't go outside. Once in a century weather events happen daily and we can't even remember the last time we saw another person in real life.
Yeah, good luck with those panels out there connecting much in these dust storms, not to mention dust, hail. Solar panels are highly subject to weather events because they're not shielded. There's no equivalent of a containment dome like in a nuclear power plant. So they are quite vulnerable.
Or at least that's what might happen. See, right now the year is 2021, and the recent UN climate change report outlines what our futures might actually look like depending on what we do right now. We as a society are still addicted to fossil fuels for our energy. But what if we weren't? What if instead we got all of our energy from the sun? How many solar panels could power the world?
I mean, if you got all the energy from the sun, and by that I mean making a Dyson sphere, you could power a lot more than the world. Though you probably wouldn't want to block the sun too much, because then you'll prevent light from hitting the Earth. Though at that point, or will we even be living on Earth anymore?
3 billion solar panels. That is how many we will need.
Is he talking now or 2100? Because that would affect, really, I'm looking for a number in, megawatts, gigawatts, that sort of thing. We'll see what he means.
And that's good. All right, great job, everybody. Let's give it up.
Oh, man.
We're back in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Good job.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That was really easy. So good thing that was a really simple answer to a really simple question.
3 billion, though, seems absurdly low to me. So I'm going to do some back-of-the-envelope calculations. So 2100, there's a lot of complicated ways to forecast it, but I'm intentionally going to lowball this just to see how close 3 billion could be. I'm going to go with a nice round number like 50,000 terawatt hours. A terawatt hour is a massive unit for a global scale. To give you a sense, a nuclear power plant, which is already pretty big for a small region, measures in the order of gigawatt hours, and a terawatt hour is 1,000 times that. For comparison, demand in 2020 was about 23,000 terawatt hours. So it might be more, it might be 70,000, 80,000 by 2100, but 50,000 is conservative. Good solar panels today are about 20% efficient. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we get way better at solar and get it cranked up to 30% by 2100, which is really, really good. That makes solar close to the low end of typical steam power plants, such as coal, natural gas, and yes, nuclear. I'm going to assume 5 hours of peak sunlight, which is generous. 365-day availability, which is super generous considering the extreme weather would probably leave us with less due to the sites being down for maintenance. No inverter failures and no energy storage problems. Let's say we somehow sort that out by 2100. You get a little over 90,000 square kilometers of panel, which is about the size of Portugal. And if standard size is a little 1.7 meters square, the number you get is over 50 billion. And these are very generous estimates for solar. The number could be, based on efficiency, downtime, you could get well over 10 times that. And again, Whether or not this would be useful depends on your ability to store and transmit this energy.
When I started writing this video 3 years ago, I had no idea how complex this question was going to be to answer. Turns out, energy is really complicated, and just simply taking how much energy we use and figuring out how many panels could supply that power is not only wrong, it's meaningless.
It is. It's ultimately how you get it to, and transporting it, distributing it, accounting for weather factors, demand factors, economic factors, yeah.
A lot of weird misconceptions around how energy works, and so in this video, I'm gonna try to clear that up because I realize this one is gonna be a little too important to just gloss over. So let's get into it.
With the alarmist stuff in the
Solar
background.
power is cool and all, but like, why do we need it in the first place?
The core problem
Technically we don't, but I digress.
is just that we were releasing too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is warming up our planet too much. If burning fossil fuels didn't do that, we wouldn't be having this problem. It is a little ironic though, because greenhouse gases are actually why complex life exists on this planet at all.
Really?
Yeah. Without carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the planet's temperature would be negative 18 degrees Celsius, and that's like
It's all about things of balance. So yeah, greenhouse gases are not bad. You just don't want too much of it, you don't want too little of it. Just like anything else. It's just like controlling any parameter, whether it be temperature of your house, temperature of your nuclear power plant, or temperature of your planet. I mean, you just need to keep everything controlled.
way too cold to support life.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide is like a blanket for space rocks because it captures the heat from the sun, allowing us to
like that.
survive in the cold dark of space. Although, add too many blankets and it starts getting too hot.
That's basically what we're doing right now, and that's why there's such a huge push for clean energy. But humanity is power hungry.
Not a bad oversimplification, I guess, but sure.
Can clean energy match that appetite? In 2017, the total
Yes, clean energy can, but not solar. Nuclear can, though. Nuclear can easily replace, and renewables such as solar and wind can help supplement, but they're not. So solar can't replace anything by itself. We've already addressed that it's intermittent. Most people know that it's intermittent and has energy storage challenges. It's only available when the sun is shining. It requires large-scale and expensive battery solutions to store when the sun is not shining. Nuclear, coal, and natural gas do not have that limitation. Solar's energy density is extremely low even compared to coal and natural gas. And with nuclear, it's not even fair. Would require a lot of infrastructure upgrades. Solar is heavily limited by geography. Some areas just get more sun than others, and for the areas that don't, you're going to need large-scale batteries and transmission lines, which is really going to cut your inefficiency. Because when I mentioned even if the panels become more efficient, the distribution system, transmission line losses, you're still going to have to deal with that. Also, one of the bigger engineering challenges with solar are unreliable inverters. For those of you who don't know, an inverter is a device that converts DC current into AC current. Solar panels produce DC current, but the inverters convert it to AC so it can be used by the grid and run all of your appliances at your house. Inverters are highly sensitive to heat and environmental conditions. Now, they're used everywhere. They're not just used in solar. They're used at nuclear power plants for instrumentation. It's a key component in an uninterruptible power supply, for instance. But because of the heat and temperature conditions at solar plants, there's also a standardization problem with certain solar fields, but that can be overcome. I don't think that's the biggest problem, but it's just the nature of the beast with solar that makes it challenging being exposed like that. But even if we could, solar is not one. You don't want to have just one source of energy. It's like putting all of your money into one stock. We don't even want just one type of nuclear power plant, for instance, because everything would be dependent on all the materials that go into maintaining and constructing new ones. It's a very vulnerable position to be in, to put all of your eggs in one basket, especially if it's solar.
energy supply was 162 quadrillion watt hours. And I know, big numbers like that, they don't
162 quadrillion watt hours. You see, this is why you might want to use metric prefixes and scientific notation.
mean anything. They're just too big for us to comprehend. But
Also, that number doesn't sound right. It's on the order of 20 to 30,000 terawatt hours. Maybe he's highballing 2100, because that only figures out to between 20 and 30 quadrillion watt hours.
In anything. They're just too big for us to comprehend.
Not if you just sit and think about it.
That's all of the energy humanity uses in a year, which is around the same amount of energy that hits the Earth from the sun every single hour.
You know, it's said when you can get that much energy and all the energy your planet uses, you become what's known as a Kardashev Type 1 civilization. We are like 0.7 or something, because we're well below that. It's an exponential scale. It's kind of like Kardashev penalizes energy efficiency.
Crazy.
It makes sense, because the sun is literally just a giant fusion power plant that's 1,000,000 times bigger than our entire planet. It's basically
He's pretty spot on when he says giant fusion power plant. It's a lot better at making fusion than we've tried on Earth. One way to loop in people that like solar into nuclear, you could say they prefer indirect nuclear fusion.
endless energy source. Fossil fuels, on the other hand, are not renewable. By definition, there's a finite supply,
No, they
so
are
we
not.
could run out in theory, even if that might take a while. Yeah, I mean, we live.
On the note of running out of fossil fuels or even uranium or anything, there's also a joke that like peak oil is also always 20 years away. So maybe when we hit peak oil, we will have nuclear fusion.
Thought we were starting to run out of oil like a while ago. It turns out we figured out how to actually squeeze all of the oil out of the rock around us, and suddenly America became one of the world's top oil providers.
That right there he just illustrated is the great proved reserves fallacy. The whole concept is reserves that are known to exist and that can be extracted economically, that's the key word, with current technology. So advances in technology can drive that number way up.
It's amazing what society can accomplish with the right economic incentives.
So how much non-renewable energy do we have left? Well, it's hard to estimate since we don't know what we haven't yet found, but it's believed that there's a quadrillion kilograms of coal still underground. And if we could extract it all
And that number is going to keep going up.
here, it would form a chunk of coal the size of an asteroid. We are definitely on the naughty list because this is how much coal we've burned so far, meaning we could literally continue burning this without slowing down for over a century. But
Now I'm just picturing Santa Claus sending a giant coal asteroid to our planet because we've been super naughty.
dig up other stuff too, such as natural gas, petroleum, and uranium, because
Well, let's go back a sec.
But we dig up other stuff too, such as natural gas,
So he's saying that's how much uranium-235 there is. Wow. Okay. So the number for uranium using proved reserves is 90 years, which doesn't sound like much. But proved reserves also assumes current technology. So, and it assumes we are not recycling and we are not using breeder reactors. That number can be extended to many thousands of years with breeder reactors. And if you do crazy stuff like harvest uranium and thorium from seawater, you can get into the tens or hundreds of thousands of years. But that's really just another case against the proved reserves argument. Also, uranium only glows green when you hold it up to UV light.
and uranium, because nuclear energy is still technically non-renewable and has to deal with geopolitics just like fossil fuels.
Has to deal with geopolitics. I mean, that's true of everything. Solar has to deal with geopolitics. Yes, nuclear is non-renewable, but non-renewable doesn't mean we're gonna run out suddenly.
Is the total energy from all of those underground resources
This is a cool
compared to the
effect.
energy of coal, rather than showing their physical sizes, which wouldn't be as useful. However, all of this becomes negligible in the face of solar energy. It is so much more plentiful than anything we can ever dig up. And
I like the miniature sun here.
this is just for 1 year. What about next year? Or the year after that? Or the year after that? Or the year... Okay, you get the point. Until the sun dies, its energy will
Those are so cute. I love this show.
always be here, free for the taking.
That being
1,000 years.
said, solar panels still require a lot of land to produce meaningful amounts of power.
It's also not carbon free. The processes used to make solar panels, I mean, you could say the same thing about nuclear as well, but it's going to result in a good bit of carbon emissions just to make this crazy solar panel project anyway, and to maintain it.
But how much land are we talking about? This is a square meter, and the amount of sunlight that is hitting just this square is called the solar constant. And let's just get rid of all this other light real quick. That's better. You see, once you account for atmospheric absorption,
Cool.
around 1 kilowatt of power actually makes it to the ground. And that's enough power to actually run a pretty high-end gaming PC. Ah!
Or a decent-sized microwave.
However, the amount of actual power that you can use depends on things like the weather or the time of day. These panels, for instance, actually rotate to follow the sun, giving them an extra 2 hours of usable sunlight per day.
That's true. Wind turbines can actually do something kind of similar. They can rotate slightly depending on the wind direction just to get a little bit more use out of it.
See the sun, you can harvest that energy using photovoltaic solar cells. They're the little squares of silicon that you see inside of an actual solar panel. And these things, when hit by sunlight, their electrons get really excited, and that excitement creates an electric current that we can then use to power things. It's like harnessing the happiness of a child when you give them ice cream.
That's cute. Also, I remember watching Monsters, Inc. when they literally made electricity harvesting child's happiness. And they found out that it was way more abundant than the energy you get from scaring children. There's a moral in there somewhere.
So there are lots of different kinds of panels, but for the sake of this video, let's use an average commercial panel, which is 1 meter wide and 2 meters tall. It's got 96 solar cells with an efficiency of 20%.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not.
So he's using slightly different numbers than the estimate I showed. There's a whole different bunch of ways you can play this game.
Panel out there, but you know what? This thing puts out 400 watts of power under ideal conditions. The cool thing about solar panels is that they're easy to scale up. If you want more power, just add more. If you want 4,000.
They're modular in that sense. You don't have to build a whole new system once it reaches capacity, though they're just tiny and they take up a lot of space.
Watts of power, you just need 10 of these things. And that's enough to power a small house. And if you want 1,000,000 watts or a megawatt.
Yeah, and have fun getting those approved by your HOA, putting that much solar panel on your roof. I've seen a few people do that in my neighborhood.
You need 2,500 panels. But how many could power a city?
Los Angeles County consumed 68 terawatt hours of electricity in 2017, while also receiving 5 peak hours of sunlight per day. To provide that energy, LA would need almost 100 million of these panels.
That will take up a lot of space, 72 square miles actually, but that's just a square 8.5 miles wide, and it can be any shape you want.
There's a huge amount of empty desert land just outside of LA, which could easily be the home to all of these panels.
And you'd be exposed to the dry heat of the desert. Yeah, it's, I mean, I'm gonna go with this idealized case, but have fun maintaining all that. What's interesting is birds flying above these can get fried by them, just what it reflects. And would you like to be a solar plant operator going out in the scorching heat, all these hot panels, driving out for miles and miles, looking for the row of the thing that got burnt out that's not working? I mean, yeah, you can put sensors in them, so it's not like they're gonna have to struggle to find a needle in a haystack. But still, it's based on what I know about plant operators, I know a few of them would rather work in a nuclear plant.
The hippies living out there wouldn't mind.
Hippies? We're not hippies. We're libertarians.
But what if
Yeah, bullets, but hail could do damage to them as well.
there is a more obvious and reasonable place to put the solar panels? Say, somewhere you'd like to have some shade? Maybe where you want to park your
Parking
car?
garage?
In a parking lot?
On average, cars spend about 95% of their entire lives literally just sitting around. LA is infamous for having a lot of cars and therefore a lot of parking lots. In fact, the city has about 19 million parking spaces, which is 200 square miles of land dedicated just for parking.
Which is just stupid, by the way. Everyone should just get an e-bike or a one-wheel. Come on, are you surprised? Of course I was gonna say that.
Anyway, this is easily enough area to power the entire county of Los Angeles from Lancaster to Long Beach. Parking lots. Plus,
That's a cool idea. Plus, your car gets super hot if it wasn't covered. Might as well use it for something.
cars would be a lot cooler in the shade. You wouldn't have to blast the AC so hard.
So let's scale that up to fit the entire United States. We used around 3,500 terawatt hours of electrical energy in 2020. So how much land would be required to power that? A lot, certainly, but perhaps not as much as you might expect.
A typical solar farm requires about 4 acres of land for every megawatt of electricity it generates, so America's solar farm would cover 8 million acres. That would be like adding a little solar hat to the top of Texas, the only state
That's
with
funny.
a 1-star review. Over the course of 5 hours, this relatively small patch of land could generate all of the country's electricity for the entire day. But
Have fun distributing that.
where does that stack up against how we currently use our land? Well, 10 million acres have been carved away for coal, 26 million acres have been leased to the oil and gas industries, and 22 million acres of land is dedicated to producing the ethanol that goes into gasoline. We make that from growing corn. So what if we just paid those corn farmers to put up solar panels instead?
If only it were that simple, right? From corn farm to solar farm. There's a whole political machine built into ethanol farms in the US. You mentioned politics. That's a good example of how entrenched that is and how powerful that lobby is.
Just saying.
Oh, here is a stat that completely blew my mind. Do you have any idea how much land in America is dedicated to cows? 41%
yeah.
of all of the land in the country is just for raising cows or to grow the food to feed cows. Almost half.
Move.
So forgive me if I don't exactly see land as a restricting issue against solar panels.
You have solar-powered cows. Cows can be in the shade.
Yeah, but if you're astute, you may have noticed a major problem with this entire idea, and that's the fact that solar panels only work when they're getting hit by the sun. What about when it's nighttime? I mean, we still use energy when it's dark out. Just because the sun's not there doesn't mean we can't still use it. The short answer is that we store it in batteries. However, before we start talking about energy storage, I think we need to understand something even more complex. What is energy? It's easy to confuse energy.
I always thought of energy as the ability to cause change. I know a physicist would use the term to do work, but that can get a little confusing. Like kinetic energy, energy used to move from one spot to the other. Potential energy, well, you stretch out a rubber band and then you let it go. You figure out what that means pretty quick. Chemical energy from chemical bonds. Nuclear energy from atomic nuclei. And of course, and the one we're all talking about, electrical energy from the movement of electric charge.
Power, but they're very different things. Think of it like—
No, they are not. That is a very common misconception that you see out there. Power is energy per unit time.
the difference between a vehicle and speed. You know, energy is a thing, but power is the speed at which that thing moves. Energy takes many different forms, but generally when people think of energy, they're, thinking of their lights, air conditioning, refrigerator, computer, electricity. But electricity is just one form of energy, and it's not even the most common. Do you know what is? Heat. Fossil fuels like coal. Do you know what is?
Because this is about solar, he's probably going to say radiant energy, referring to the energy that we get from the sun.
Heat.
Swing and a miss on my part, though we experience that as heat.
Fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas are forms of chemical energy. They need to be burned in order to be useful. And that's an important distinction because that conversion to heat is costly. You see, heat is really low quality energy. It's inefficient and easy to waste, but electricity, on the other hand, is like primo, high quality, top shelf energy because it's very efficient and surprisingly hard to waste.
I think I get what he's driving at, but I wouldn't look too much into that because ultimately you're converting something to electricity, and in the context of solar panels, he even mentioned 20%. That's less efficient than a typical steam cycle that's about 33%. Or the chemical conversions or the heat produced by cells in the human body, which is on the order of 60%.
So how much of our energy is actually electric?
Not much. Around 20% of all of the energy we actually use is electric.
Wait, what?
Yeah, no, I can explain this better. Here. This gnarly looking image is called a Sankey diagram, and it breaks down America's total annual energy use.
I remember looking at these a lot in college.
Really cool way. Over here on the left, we can see the energy sources, but as we move to the right, we see where they end up. And the thickness of each path visually indicates how much energy flows there, which is pretty cool. But if you look over here at the right of the diagram, you'll find something interesting. This is all of the energy we actually use, but you see the box labeled rejected energy? That is the energy we waste when converting chemical energy to heat. That's right, 2/3 of the energy we actually generate is literally wasted because we deal in heat! We always hear that we need to transition to renewable energy, but what that really means is that we've got to upgrade everything to be electric. Right now, 80% of our
Okay, but renewable energy is still produced by heat turbines. A lot of renewables is just burning wood, biomass. So you are using heat when you say renewable, and a lot of it is less efficient to boot. So those He is describing two very different problems.
Is not even compatible with renewables because it's not electric. If it was, we'd actually generate far less energy overall because there wouldn't be any of that waste. Or at least
the argument for electrification isn't necessarily an efficiency thing, it's a carbon reduction thing if you're using sources like nuclear and renewables instead of fossil fuels. But in the case of converting to an electric car, in an environment in charging stations that are powered by coal or natural gas, if it's mainly coal, you can actually be more carbon intensive than just a regular gasoline internal combustion engine.
much of it. Because remember, electricity is the good stuff. Okay, so
It's weird. So it's almost like if we could it's like what he's getting at is if we could somehow just plug directly into the ground and get electricity out or something. Because yes, electricity to electricity is efficient. It can be 95% efficient. And I mean, that is about the efficiency of a transmission line. It's to the point where most engineers don't even express it that way. They express it as a 5 to 10% loss due to transmission because it's so little of that waste, which again comes from heat. But I don't see how he's advocating just getting straight electricity from something. I'm not following him at all on that.
electrify everything, but where do we start? I think we can start with
If you electrify everything, you're still dependent on that system, though. I'm gonna need some help down in the comments on this one. There may be a point that he said that I missed.
machines, and I'm talking about like engines that burn fuel to move. They can be replaced with electric motors. There are over 1 billion passenger cars on the
They can, but the electric motors are going to need to be plugged into a grid, which is dependent on energy sources that use heat, whether it's fossil fuels, renewables, or nuclear.
today. There's also trucks, planes, trains, ships, tractors, whatever the heck this thing is. Just make them all electric. Okay, obviously that's easier said than done and probably going to be very expensive.
But it doesn't solve your issue. If you had maybe he's just trying to say it for the sake of his solar example. That might be actually where he got his 144 quadrillion number from. He assumed you did all this in 2100.
But what is the value of our future? And seriously, just that alone will go so far towards making a cleaner future.
There are, of course, so many things we need to do to reduce our carbon footprint, but which fossil fuel has the biggest shoe?
Okay, here is another Sankey diagram showing energy's carbon footprint. These are all the emissions we want to stop, and right away, we can see that the two biggest offenders are petroleum and coal. Natural gas is at least cleaner than both of them, even though, it's still bad. But coal is what annoys me because basically the only thing it's used for is to generate electricity. And okay, sure, about 10% is used to make steel and important stuff like that. But coal can be replaced entirely with renewable energy right now.
If a wizard somehow did that, we would have so much energy intermittency issues. If you're going to have your wizard, go ahead and replace it with nuclear. You see right up there, it lists 0. It actually shows 0 for nuclear, solar, wind, and hydro. Now, end to end, that's not true for any of those, even nuclear. If you're looking at things like building and maintenance, just because it involves manufacturing because it involves manufacturing things which use carbon. But it's far less than coal and natural gas. And if we included end-to-end, the numbers from coal and natural gas would also go way up in response. But there are some of these charts that show that nuclear produces even less carbon than solar. That depends a little bit both on your nuclear plant design and your solar panel design, but I'm just going to say they're close.
So we need renewable electricity that we can store. The concept of a battery is not limited to what
You don't need it to be renewable. This is probably the biggest misconception I hear about renewables, is it has to be renewable for it to be carbon-free. Not true. Nuclear is an example. And all renewable sources are carbon-free. Not true. Biomass is very carbon-intensive.
commonly associate with the word.
I don't care what the dictionary says, a battery is just a thing that stores energy. Trees are chemical batteries.
Beating someone with blows. You could cause battery with a battery. I think I remember that on an episode of Better Call Saul.
Lava? It's a thermal battery. Being up high is a gravity battery. Anything in motion is a kinetic battery. The whole idea behind regenerative...
I've also heard kinetic batteries refer to high-velocity artillery, such as railguns that just don't use explosives. That's pretty funny.
...in cars is to capture the energy of its motion, which slows down the car. And so you can literally recharge a car by just going down a hill. Normally that kinetic energy is injected into the brakes as, you guessed it, heat.
Speaking of charging electric cars,
This whole heat versus electricity thing, after hearing more of this, I'm thinking they just have some misconceptions.
we recharge them by attaching solar panels to the roof. And I mean, yeah, actually, that's a good idea. But let's take a closer look.
This might look a little ridiculous, but if the car's just gonna sit there all day in the sun, it could make a lot of sense, especially if you don't drive much.
You need to take into consideration how that affects your fuel economy, the aerodynamics of the vehicle. I've experienced that on driving across the country, moving, and silly strapping stuff to the roof of my car, and how much more I had to stop for gas. And it was smaller than that thing.
Is that you'd be lucky to get 3 miles of range added every hour on a perfect day, and that would take weeks to fill up your car. What about the dream of driving entirely from solar power? Well, dream on. This Tesla draws about 15 kilowatts of power while driving, so this is a 15 kilowatt solar array. Okay, obviously this is unrealistic for a number of reasons, but it really shows the irony of solar power. There's so much of it around us, and yet cars, they just can't get enough. There's a good reason why the solar cars that actually do exist look like this.
This is why we use batteries. They act as the
That's
buffer zone
funny.
between electrical generation and use. Can you imagine if every time you wanted to drink water, you had to drink directly from a hose instead of filling a glass? Like a normal person?
That's actually a decent analogy. Though a better one would be if the hose was set to mist.
That is like trying to use renewable energy without energy storage.
The lithium-ion battery is an incredible invention. I am also admittedly a huge lithium-ion nerd. It's powerful, portable, efficient, and arguably the enabling factor behind most of today's technology.
But what
You could actually have nuclear batteries that run off of radioactive decay. I'll pin a comment down below if you'd like to hear more.
is a better battery? One that is so easy to access and so plentiful that not only does it cover most of our planet, it's the most common element in the entire universe. Hydrogen.
Yep.
Water is created when oxygen combines with hydrogen, and the raw fuel to make hydrogen is simply water. The energy from this one jug of water is about the same amount as what's inside the battery of this Tesla. In fact, our oceans could store enough energy to power society for 30 million years.
Sounds pretty great, right?
If you're going to use that same sort of large-scale logic, you could also say, let's just extract all the uranium and thorium from it, use breeder reactors, and we'll have enough nuclear power to last us for 5 billion years until the sun engulfs the Earth.
Today, it can't even be considered a good battery. Hydrogen is very inefficient, it's expensive, and it's still mostly
Yeah, hydrogen is another example of something like solar, which is funny because the sun is mostly hydrogen and it causes fusion by fusing hydrogen into helium. But it's so abundant, but at the same time, not dense and not harnessable. It's quite tantalizing, isn't it?
by burning fossil fuels, even though you can literally make hydrogen by electrocuting water. It requires a lot of
And that requires electricity, which is generated probably by a source generated from heat.
energy to separate the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. But in the future, that might not actually matter. If renewables are so plentiful that it becomes something like free Wi-Fi, then any amount of energy would be okay.
Of course, this is also
That's the key word. He should have said if energy becomes so abundant, not if renewables, because renewables just don't make up that much.
hypothetical. There's a lot of innovation that needs to happen before energy storage and renewables can truly be effective in society.
So maybe now you can see how meaningless the prompt to this entire video actually is.
I don't think it's meaningless. It's a fun thought experiment. It's why I like watching XKCD What If videos.
How many solar panels could power the world? I think a better question might actually be, what would it look like if our electric future was powered by the sun?
There are dozens of different technologies.
You could interpret that a couple of ways, and you could say, what if you made fusion reactors? I actually think fusion, while fusion's not a proven technology, how it would work would just be similar to other power generations in that you wouldn't have the energy storage issue. It's just another way to make steam and make heat. Because after all, solar is from heat, it's heat from the sun.
Harness solar energy. Outside of Las Vegas is a really neat thermal power plant that concentrates the sun's energy by using thousands of mirrors. And they all reflect light to the center of that tower that you can see. I'm gonna switch cameras. This allows it to basically act like a regular power plant, except it's solar.
I mean, if you think about it, even the wind is solar powered because the heat from the sun causes the wind. But I digress.
My original idea for this
But the thing is, it's so inefficient compared to a more compact-sized thermal power plant like a nuclear power plant.
was to show that we could power the world by covering New Zealand in solar panels. Middle Earth could be our salvation.
Good luck transferring all of that energy across oceans. Man. What would that even look like? Transmission lines that are 10,000 miles long.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a
Solar panel. However, the truth is that we need that many panels always pointing at the sun, so the land we'd actually need is closer to the size of France.
The point is that there is more than enough land to go around for this, but that leads to the question, where would we put them? Everywhere! Why not?
You're gonna want to spread it out. You're gonna want to spread it out.
Pretty much anywhere there's empty land that can see the sun locally to you can have solar panels and probably be enough to power your entire town, which is pretty cool. The future of energy is going to be very local.
There's just one last problem.
How do we do that? Easy. All we gotta do is we just need to,
I mean, it's just a matter of building solar panels.
Cut! That's a wrap, everyone!
I mean, is that all you need? We have the crew for like another hour.
I mean, nah, it's fine. We don't need to answer that. I mean, what's the point of any of this?
Give it
Like,
your
why
best
do we need to
shot.
worry about it?
Code Red for humanity. Human activities are responsible for climate change.
We're already paying the price of ignoring scientists' warnings.
A hotter future is already locked in.
The extremes we're now experiencing, fires, floods, droughts, and storms, will
That's the other reason why you want to spread it out. Any of these weather events knocks out all of your solar panels that are in that one spot, that's game over. And that's another reason why you want different types of energy sources so they're not all vulnerable to some common mode failure like this. That's why power plants in real life are spread out. That's why we use different energy sources. Not saying solar doesn't have its part or we shouldn't use it, but this is why these things happen.
intensify.
We don't think we've had CO2 levels this high for about 5 million years.
This is the last.
And it's not just a CO2 thing either.
Climate change is here now, but we are also here now. And if we don't act, who will?
Climate change is real. It is unequivocally human-caused, and we've only just begun to see its catastrophic effects. It's easy to
Which is why we need nuclear. It's going to get you way more the energy density. It's a lot safer than solar in terms of just being reliable. Less likely to have grid blackouts, which can result in many severe injuries and fatalities. Yes, we should still use solar, but just not rely on it by itself.
about how it might be too hard or too expensive. It's easy to look at other massive problems and say, what about them? It's easy to be angry. It's hard to be constructive.
Talking about just solar and then talking about climate change, I'm concerned that this could be a bit misleading in that like solar or renewables are the only way to fight global climate change when it's strictly not. They need to work in tandem with strong base load such as nuclear. And only then would even what he talked about with the mass electrification of most industry, would you really start to see it pay dividends as far as carbon reduction. But those are just my thoughts. I know this was an oversimplification on purpose. I enjoyed this video, but unfortunately the misleading information about heat versus electricity and now this, it's kind of leaving a weird taste in my mouth. But overall, I still thought this was an entertaining video with some cool visual effects. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.